All right, welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about designing dashboards that talk. What does that mean, JD? I have no idea, actually. Let's find out. Let's find out what that means. So I'm Jason Winters, Vice President of Analytics UX. I've been with Salesforce for about 13 years, one of the first designers to join the company, so I've worked on pretty much all the clouds. But for the last few years, really been focused on our analytics products. And with me today, JD Vogt.
Hi, I'm JD Vogt. I've been at Salesforce for 6 years and have worked on search, mobile, S1, now Salesforce, Lightning, and analytics.
All right. As always, please make any future purchasing decisions based on what is available today. We are a publicly traded company, as you know. And also, thank you. Thank you to the dev and admin community coming here today, giving us your feedback, listening, learning. You really drive our roadmap. What we do at Salesforce is from you, the trailblazers, and our future trailblazers. Thank you, and we're excited to be here today with you. So we're talking a little bit about Salesforce analytics today, and this is sort of what we call our spectrum of analytics. So on the left, you have the reports and dashboards. You might know those as sort of operational reports and dashboard tabs that are come with every Salesforce license. Then we get into out-of-the-box analytic apps on the left-hand side, and that's sort of all of the basic stuff on the left, and it gets more advanced as you work your way to the right, where we have Einstein Data Insights, which is a pilot feature that we're working on, Einstein Discovery, which is a new feature that came from the acquisition of a company called BeyondCore, and then the Einstein Analytics Platform. And so really what we're talking about today are sort of the capabilities of what's available from a design standpoint as you're building with Einstein Analytics. And if you saw the keynote today, you might have seen some of that, the great demo for the WeWork, where they showed Lightning components alongside Einstein Analytics components, alongside Einstein prediction components. And that Einstein Analytics piece is really kind of what we're talking about. But we're talking about it from the standpoint of design and design best practices. So really you can apply this to any project that you're working on, whether it's analytics or not. Our focus today is analytics, but it's really about sort of best practices of design. So before we begin, we'll ask for a little help from our friend Astro here to sort of just clear our mind, get into that sort of San Francisco Zen moment here and empty your mind of everything. We're going to start from scratch, okay? And then I want you to take a moment and let's picture a dashboard in your mind. Maybe close your eyes and really kind of envision what you think of when you think of a dashboard. What do you see? It might look something like this. So what is that exactly? Might be a static document, might be sort of a dense grid of charts, a little bit of information overload, not terribly actionable, and often these are dropped into folders where they're eventually sort of live their life and are forgotten. So now I want you to take a moment and think of an app. What do you think of when we talk about an app? What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of the word app? You might think of something like this. Something that's dynamic and layered, something that's focused and task-oriented, something that's device-appropriate, actionable, something that's designed, not authored. Like when we think of documents, we think of authoring documents. When we think of an application, we think of that application being designed and having a life cycle, something that you expect to be updated regularly and to continue to improve and improve as that app evolves. So really what we're asking you to do is sort of think in terms of analytic apps, not just dashboards. So just some examples to kind of frame you. These are the out-of-the-box templates that come with Einstein Analytics today. As you're setting up, you can do templates for sales and service. This is an example of an overview page. So you've got your key performance indicators, KPIs at the top, and below we have links going to deeper pages. And this is something that's really been sort of designed around a sales persona and is very layered, but has this sort of succinct overview page. This is another one of the sales boards that we do. And a lot of times, instead of doing a dashboard with many different visualizations, what we really focus on is what we call a hero chart. One chart that is driving an actionable list below it, so I can then facet, say, on this waterfall chart to see what's moved out, and then take action on the faceted list of opportunities below that. Just other examples, sort of rich leaderboards, where we want to see the people's faces, white space analysis, where you can really quickly visually see where there might be gaps or opportunities to sell new products in different regions. Here we are in another one, sales stage analysis. Is this a dashboard or is this an app?
Looks like an app to me.
All right, good. And again, it's because it's task-focused, action-oriented, and then this is these dynamic and layered experiences. A couple examples of, again, sort of service. And again, these are those out-of-box templates. We really want you to just think of this throughout the whole talk, really, just in terms of analytic apps, not just sort of traditional dashboards. Okay, so we're ready to begin our design journey. But often the hardest part of any sort of design project is really, where does inspiration come with? And so as designers, we have frameworks that we use to sort of help us get inspired and move forward. I love this quote from John Maeda: "Art makes questions, design makes solutions." But one of my favorite questions, really, is what if? Because many of my design projects start with that question. You might not be familiar with the name David Rockwell, but he's this really wonderful designer and architect, and he's worked on things like the Oscar stages, very rich experiences. You may have been to the Cosmopolitan Hotel in Las Vegas, where there is this giant chandelier bar, where he put an entire bar in this 3-story chandelier. And he calls these mashups, and he has a book where he talks about it, where he says, you know, a mashup, asking what if, leads to these unexpected combinations. We seek forms and materials that conventionally don't go together to create new hybrids. Mashups would not otherwise have been imagined, right? So what if you put an entire bar in a chandelier? What if you took the Nobu restaurant experience and sort of expanded that to a whole hotel experience? So asking what if really frees you to start thinking bigger from the beginning. You don't want to start a design project thinking small, you want to think big. You want to sort of break out of the mold and really challenge yourself to mash things together. And this idea of mashups has always been within the Salesforce DNA. So if you've ever read Mark's book, Behind the Cloud, you've seen him talk about it, you know, very early on. The question that he asked for Salesforce was, what if business software was as easy as Amazon.com? So a few examples that our own team, and I manage the analytics user experience design team, you know, just internally we ask these questions, what if? And we come up with concepts, similar to the concept cars. Some of these make it into the product, some of them don't, but just going to share that process with you and show you a few examples. So what if daily insights were delivered to you like the news? Your Salesforce experience might look something like this, where you have insights and visuals coming directed to you like a newspaper, being pushed to you. What if every page in Salesforce was data-driven? You might expect rich visualizations throughout every Salesforce page. This was a visualization called a Sankey diagram, and we mocked this up in a concept, and one of the engineers fell in love with it, and he actually delivered. So this is a chart that's now available, and it looks exactly like that. This production chart that's available to show the way data flows into different buckets. Same thing with this beautiful funnel chart, which we call an origami chart. And if you see the way it moves, which we'll show a little bit later, I think, it's just a beautiful fluid chart. So what if, another example, what if discovering connections and insights in your data was more like a game? Might look something like this. What if I tracked my work performances like I track my own personal workouts? You might expect an experience on your phone, like a Fitbit experience, where you see your core goals for your work life in the same way that you track your health health goals. So starting each day with a new what if, in the business world, you might ask questions like, what if my sales team was only allowed to use one app? That might spur a conversation. Or what if my entire company ran on one key performance indicator? What if we hit our insights in our boss's breakfast cereal? Now, I'm not suggesting you break into anyone's house, but the idea of your stakeholder wanting to get insights maybe the first thing in the morning, and so you might want to deliver a digest every morning to that person with key insights. So we're inspired, but we need some principles to guide us. JD, help us out with some principles.
Sure thing. So here at Salesforce, we have a set of design principles that actually came about when we made the Lightning experience. And design principles have this purpose of aligning how you're thinking about the experience you want to actually create. And it gives you an anchor to kind of hold on to, like, hey, are we actually achieving this thing that we said we wanted to do? And so here's the 4 that we have here. First one is clarity. We want to eliminate ambiguity and make sure that whenever a user sees a particular screen, it's very clear to them what they can do. Efficiency. We want experiences to be things that are not tedious or boring. You know, so people don't want to do the same thing over and over, repetitious. And we want to save people clicks and even thought process that they have to do. Consistency, you might recognize these are the postcard houses here from here in San Francisco. We want to make sure that when you have a particular experience, that when you encounter something similar to it in another situation, there's a consistency and a similarity so that you're like, oh, I think I could take this particular thing on. It also adds a cohesion to the apps that you're building. And beauty, have respect for the people who are using your app, right? And pay attention to the details and that final level of polish and add that beautiful sort of aspect to it. Beauty is also interesting in that it's sort of an attractor, so we're attracted to things that are beautiful. If you think of a flower in a forest, you have this dark forest, but this flower that kind of stands out, you're attracted to it, and you want to make sure that, I guess the other great thing about beauty is that it can also users can form an emotional connection with it. So by making your apps look beautiful is a way that you can also get people interested in using your apps. And so we put these, out of all the potential things we could have picked, we picked these 4. And then if you know anything about the culture at Salesforce as far as the product organization, whenever you show a list, you are asked to put that list in priority order. And believe me, you don't want to be the rookie in front of the room with an unprioritized list because you would ask that. So when we put these principles together, we're like, well, how do we actually prioritize these? What's the most important thing? And we thought, and so these are ranked in that order. And we did kind of a thought experiment as well, like, hey, if we made everything really beautiful, what would that be like? Well, it could be kind of cotton candy-ish, right? It might look really good and interesting, but you kind of go and taste it and it just disappears, right? We didn't want that experience for users. Same with things that were consistent. If you have something that's kind of consistently mediocre, like, do you want to keep doing something mediocre? No. Efficiency, we actually toyed with efficiency and clarity as the most important thing, but we decided on clarity first because we really wanted to make it clear for users what they had to do in a given context. If we made things really efficient, a command line is really efficient, but it can be pretty opaque as to how to use it, and so that's why we put it second. Another thing we're very mindful of in Einstein Analytics is fluidity, and if you've ever seen the different charts or the one you saw in the keynote today, stuff just flows, and you get this sort of great immersive experience. So we're also very cognizant of that. All right, so we're inspired. We got our guiding principles. Time for action. I'll hand it back to you, Jason.
All right. Thank you, JD. Another quote I love, design is not just what it looks like and feels like, design is how it works. So often people talk about design thinking, and what does that really mean? Often our ideas of what design is really kind of stuck at this top level when we start thinking about how it looks and feels, and really the surface, the colors, fonts, brandings, the particular visualizations. But really design goes much deeper than that, and it should go much deeper. The next layer we talk about is structure, sort of the scope of the application that you're designing, the layout, the flow between the pages, and how people discover those pages. But at the base layer, the most important thing that you really should spend 80% of your time figuring out is the correct purpose, your users' intentions, their goals, and their desired actions. And that's really where you want to just nail that first. That's the foundation that you're going to build all of good designs on. So where does that start from? How do you start that process? Really, it starts with this idea of going through a 3-step process of empathizing with your users, ideating, and then designing and testing. So what's the process that we follow at Salesforce? Starting with empathy, really understanding our audience. Empathy is really the bedrock of that good design. So in order to frame our understanding, we start gathering information about users' intentions, their goals, their desired actions. And that leads to a path of inquiry. The title of this, From Spreadsheets to Stories, Making Things That Talk, it's really about sort of establishing what are the guideposts through the application. And really that starts with defining the user goals, then something we kind of call question storming. You think about brainstorming, but instead of brainstorming sort of the features of an application, like coming up with a feature list, you're really prioritizing the questions that you want that application to answer. And again, this is something that would apply to an analytics project, but really anything. So you list all those questions needed to answer the goals. From there, you move on to grouping those similar questions together into themes. You prioritize them, and you identify the best metrics to answer each of those questions. And out of that, you come with, and then finally, actually, you identify the relevant business actions you want to take with those metrics. So if this metric is bad, what is the thing I want to do about it? Okay. At the end, you have a clear outcome. And so that first session might look something like this. It might just be a hierarchy of questions, right? And so that first overview dashboard I showed you an example of answers the top level questions. I see a number I don't like, I'm drilling down to answer a secondary question. That might tell me something else is not quite right, and I need to make an improvement, drill down to a third level of questions.
So you don't start with like, what kind of charts I can put on here? Or I want to use
no.
blue because that's our corporate color.
Yeah. Or someone hands you a spreadsheet that said, this is the spreadsheet that we've used for the last 5 years, now make it into a dashboard, right? Don't just look at the spreadsheet and what's on there today. Take a moment to step back, figure out what that story is, what that path of inquiry is that you actually want to take people through to eventually to actionability. So we've got, at first we're just really just getting aligned on words, right? Get everybody who's on the project really aligned on the words, the priorities of what this should do and how people should go through it. Then we start ideating and sharing ideas. And how do you get people who aren't necessarily designers in a room to share ideas? And we do this through something we call design studios. And for design studios, you just need some simple materials, paper, markers, yellow Post-its, and you get people in a room. We do these in about 90 minutes. Time boxing is really important. But we go through a 4-step process in which we sketch, we present the ideas back to each other, we prioritize ideas, and we design and sort. And if you think, oh, I'm not a designer, I can't really sketch, or my stakeholders aren't going to want to sketch ideas, it's really not about the quality of the sketches. It's about getting people in the room, getting their preconceptions of what the solution should be out of their brains, and putting it down in paper and having a conversation about it. It's kind of like if you have a child who does a picture at school and they bring it home and they leave it on the counter, you might not have any idea what that picture is, but then you ask them to explain it to you and there's a whole story there. So you can have a really rough sketch that a business stakeholder made, but when you have them explain it in a room and just kind of time box the process, all these amazing stories come out. And that really creates the funnel for your design. You start the day off with maybe no ideas. 90 minutes later, you've got 100 great ideas that you're now starting to narrow down. And the output of that can be as simple as sketches on the wall like this and some Post-its. All right, so we talked a little bit about sort of getting aligned on the purpose section of it. And then goes into a little more about structure. I'll hand it back to JD.
All right, cool. So let's talk about structure. So when you're designing information, it starts with organization and how you want to bucket, essentially, the different chunks of information in your app. It's really important. So a couple of different ways you can think about this. After you get up with that ideation, you want to formulate these things. And one way to do that is kind of through a persona-driven structure. So you want to look at the different people that are going to be in this particular app, and how do you want to structure the information for them. So in this particular one, we have a sales leader, a sales manager, and a sales rep. And you can see we've bucketed underneath them the types of ideas or the types of bullets that they are going to be interested in, right? So that you can start to get a sense of what the navigational structure is going to be. When you dive into a particular person, you can also think of a task-driven structure. So when you get more into the nuts and bolts of it, one thing we look at are, for instance, in our service application, the structure looks more like this. It's actually around nouns, essentially, that they're going to go and act upon. So you've got cases, team, channels, and accounts. And people kind of gravitate like, oh, that's the accounts. I do account stuff over there, right? So you can think of the different verbs that people are going to be using inside of those nouns.
And even though the structure here is showing nouns, when you get into the individual pages, they're each answering questions. And you don't want to, when we talk about that sort of traditional dashboards, they might try to answer 100 questions on one dashboard. This is really about sort of guiding them through levels of simple questions so you don't overwhelm them.
Good point. Another thing you can do when you start to lay out the actual page and the information on it is take advantage of a couple of kind of time-tested patterns. So one of those is an F pattern. You'll see this a lot on websites and on newspapers. eye tracking studies have shown that people very often have this sort of, they go down the left side of the page and then they kind of go across. So you want to make sure you get good information in those places. You can also use a Z pattern for your designs. This works very well on mobile since it's often a constrained width sort of interface. And so you just kind of structure things. People go across and then diagonally down and then back over again. Another common thing we'll see is a side-by-side pattern. So if the use case, what the person needs to do is compare things, you might want to put two charts that are similar to each other right next to each other so they can make that visual comparison, almost squint their eyes and see the difference. And so what we've done is, Jason showed you some of those screens earlier. We kind of, some of the sales app examples. What we're going to do now is just kind of break down some of the components on those pages, and you can kind of see how it all works. So what we found works pretty well is, of course, you got the global header at the top, a page title, and then actions underneath that in this particular one. Then we've got a set of KPIs, or key performance indicators. We've got goals underneath that. And then we have, in this particular one, this is a home page, so it's meant for navigation, right? So you kind of go in there like, hey, what's happening? Okay, now I'm going to go and do my real thing. So we've set it up that way. When we get into this one, this is the more of this sales leader page, right? So we've added another layer here of filters. This tends to be a pretty good place for filters. People kind of go up to the top, and they're essentially kind of reconstructing their page with the filters. And then, as Jason mentioned before, we got the big hero chart area. There's some smaller components inside that, but we've kind of blocked it off that way, and then we've got a table beneath to actually see the actual results of the things that you facet. And you can see that pattern, kind of repeat itself in various ones. This is kind of that Z layout we'd seen before. Here's one with that sort of F pattern with the filters over on the left, or KPIs on the left. In this particular one, we're using a graphical filter over on the left. And here's an example of that side by side. And so when you put all these together, so you also want to be thinking about, in that sort of path of inquiry that you did earlier in the process, you want to think about what kind of questions are people going to be asking and in what order are they going to be. And so when we've set up the app, we don't kind of start with like, hey, what are our benchmarks? You start with this, hey, how are things looking? And give me a place to get to the next thing. And if things weren't looking that good, you're like, oh, well, how are we doing against quota? And if you can't answer that question or you don't like the answer to it, okay, well, what does the overall pipeline look like? Well, I'm not so sure. Well, what are we pitching and to who are we pitching it? And then, well, who should we be selling to? So those are like natural order of questions people have, so we set the page order up in the hierarchy in that same way.
Okay. We'll go a little quicker since we can get to some hands-on demos as well. But talk just really a little bit about Surface. So a few of the things we think about with Surface, the way things look and feel, alignment. Alignment's really critical, so you don't sort of throw people off as they're coming in. They see things that are organized and tied to a grid. And so one of the things as we've evolved the design tools within Einstein Analytics is to really make that alignment piece really built into it. So you have a grid that you can snap to at different levels of granularity to make alignment really sort of a no-brainer. The second thing you need to think about is just the proximity of things, the way you use color, and we have containers, and JD will demo some of this, but really making sure that the proximity and the padding that you're using keeps things associated. So when you see sort of a color change like that green and red, it's associated with the number above by the proximity and the white space padding around it. And then finally, we wanted to make these experiences, we want you to make them yours, right? We want you to have that branded experience. You saw in the demos in the keynote, the ability to do theming, lots of flexibility in Einstein Analytics as far as the colors and themes that you can apply to your charts and visuals. All right, handing back to JD.
All right, cool. So I'm going to do a little demo here. This was, we're so often stuck in like sales information and marketing information. Just for fun, I went out and downloaded some police information to look at like incidents that had happened. And so before I did that, I actually had just kind of sketched out really quickly in a sketchbook some ideas for maybe things that I want to do. So it was doing that first step, right, of
It's a beautiful little sketch you have there, JD. Are you an artist? Are you a trained designer?
I am
what
not.
happened here?
I am not an artist. No.
No, but those are good sketches. Though.
I can draw a pretty good box.
Okay, that's great. And that's really all you need to do. It's a nice pen, too. I like that pen.
Yep. So yeah, if you want to draw, so I'll tell you, here's the secret. Buy a pen like that. That's like a Unipin 3 or a 5. 5 is actually a bit better. Buy a little gray marker as well, and your stuff is going to look amazing.
You do like shading, make the little borders a little darker
People will
around
be
the
like,
edge,
wow,
makes it look
can you
very
do
professional.
storyboards for
Very
movies?
nice.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. Yep. So
Score
let's
some
go ahead
points
and
there.
I'm going to show you how this actually turned out. So let's go ahead and let's leave it here because we're going to edit this. So this is like San Francisco police incidents year to date. This was done a little while back, but you can see here's like different days of the week, different types of incidents that happened, and then
Stop you for 1 second, JD. Where are you right now? What tool are you using? What application is this?
this is Einstein Analytics.
Okay, and I see something at the top there that says Analytics Studio. What's the Analytics Studio?
Analytics Studio is where you can go and author awesome analytics.
Are you
apps.
authoring them or are you designing them? I
No,
just
you're
told
de-
them you're designing them,
designing,
not authoring
yeah.
them, JD. Thank you. Thank you, JD. Designing, yes, it's the design. It's where producers of analytic apps do all their design and development work.
Yep.
Awesome.
And so you can see here, I've used some of those patterns we talked about, right? Here's the header, filters. I've got KPIs at the top there and a table of results down at the bottom. And you know, if I go into this filter, I can say, oh, I'm interested in all the incidents that happen in the central area, right? Another thing I've added on here that's kind of interesting is this little show extras piece. And when I do that, I can reveal this map. And
Fluidity.
I added a couple of additional charts at the bottom as well. And now you can go through and you can click on, you know, a particular area of the city and see how it's been performing. At the top here, I added these gauges so you can see, you know, how resolved or unresolved were these incidents that happened. They're colored. So let's take a quick look at like some of the innards of this, and I'll kind of walk you through how this got made. So first thing, I would say one thing that we found works pretty well for designing these dashboards is to use set our columns overall to a number like 48. 48 is great because if you can divide it lots of different ways. So if you're a beginner, you start with 12 and that sort of thing, but when you want to get more meshed in, that works pretty well. We also set the row height to fine and the cell spacing to 0 and the vertical to 0. So if you want to create some of the things you saw earlier, those are the tips we used.
So the out of the box, the grid is fairly roomy as far as the grid goes, but as you get more comfortable with the tool, making the grid a little more dense and fine gives you more control over the overall layout.
Yep. We also find it works pretty well to set a dashboard width, sort of a max width, because if sometimes users have gigantic screens and stuff can get kind of blown out looking. So by setting that width, you're constraining that max, and it looks pretty well that way. One other thing I thought would be kind of interesting to look at. So if you noticed, like when we went to this screen, this map kind of magically just showed up. You're like, what was that? So this is, I don't know if you played with it, this is a new feature called Pages. It's in beta right now, I think, but it's soon to be released to everyone. So here's how it kind of works. So you've got these tabs up here at the top. Each one is a page. And I've got this one here of like, here's my Scratchpad 1 and Scratchpad 2. And I've got this container object that says move me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to add it to another page. And I'll say Scratchpad 2, apply it. And now on Scratchpad 2, it's here. And so I'm going to move it. And if we go back to Scratchpad 1, you can see that it shows up in both places. So what's awesome about Pages is this gives you different views onto the dashboard. So you don't have to go to an entirely new dashboard, you know, to show a particular interaction or something. You can stay on that dashboard. You don't have to reload it and everything. You can also get these cool transitions for free.
Yeah, it's almost like magic moving, if you ever use Keynote, where you're going in between these the different slides and having the animation happen automatically. And again, that's that fluidity principle we talked about in analytics, really wanting to keep you in context and make the experience sort of as fluid and as engaging as possible. And this new Pages within a single dashboard feature really allows you to do that in interesting, creative ways.
Yep. So I'll do a quick, one other quick kind of thing that people sometimes ask about. They're like, hey, is this a new type of chart? Like, what is this sort of thing here, this histogram? And this is actually really easy. All you gotta do is strip everything away from it. So let me show you an example of that. So let's just get rid of this guy here. Oh, actually, one other thing I want to show you really quick is that the awesome thing about Pages is that if you do have things you want to repeat from one place to another, you can just tell it to be there. So I'm going to take this filter bar, and I'm going to add it to both of these Scratchpad pages. And now it's there, and I didn't have to go and, make a bunch of, finesse all my different things, get them to line up right. And they look good. So I'm going to put in a container here, and I'm going to add a chart to it. And so in here, I'm going to go in and choose, here's my number of instance, and I'm just going to say I want this to be broken down by week.
So are you still in the designer here? What is this tool that you're using now, JD?
I'm now technically in the Explorer. So this is where you can go ahead and create queries and visualizations that you're going to be using in your dashboards. And I'm going to change this to a column, right? So I can get that vertical bar. And you can see it there. So we're not quite there, but it's pretty simple to change. So I'm going to go into some of the chart properties, and I'm going to say, get rid of this show values, and I'm going to get rid of this, and the auto fit, I'm going to say make it fit, and the x-axis, get rid of that, and we'll also get rid of the legend, right? So now we have, look back at the example, right? Now we have that guy right there. And so all you have to do then is just kind of resize it the way you want and put it in. I think another kind of interesting thing might be if you look at this page right here, was the heat map. And so if you drag another chart in here, I was kind of interested in like, hey, I wonder if more crime happens on weekends or weekdays or what happens. So one thing I'd looked at was like, well, let's just kind of look at this by a day of week. And indeed, it seems like, they take Sundays off a little bit. But it didn't, I was like, well, I wonder what kind of other interesting patterns there might be in here. So I'd also looked at, maybe by the category, but that just got kind of crazy looking. So let's go ahead and remove that guy. Whoops. One thing you can do, if you haven't tried this already, is you can click this little chart icon over here, and you can get suggestions from Einstein, essentially, of like other charts you could make. And so as you click through these, right, you can see here's like an area map. I didn't see a lot of patterns, but I thought this was kind of interesting, right, when I got to this heat map. I'm like, wow, now I can start to see some patterns showing, and so I picked one of those.
So Einstein's actually looking at your data there, the type of query that you were starting to build, and suggesting the right type of visualization for that, the complexity of that query.
And give you some great ideas as to what to do. So I also want to show you, so kind of back to the pages piece as well, I want to show you some excellent examples that one of our designers, Eddie, has worked on, showing that. So here, for example, is, let me just hide this guy right here. Here, for example, if you click on one of these, right, you can see this sort of like fade in or pop in like this. And again, we're just sort of changing the state, but we didn't have to leave this dashboard.
So he's using sort of those subpages within a dashboard to create these different states within the same experience. And again, you get these rich, fluid UIs.
Another kind of use case is a carousel, right? Sometimes you want to move things, for instance, on a phone or even on a desktop. And so this is really just moving to another page like that, but you get this great animation of it kind of looking like you're scrolling through things. Here's one I think is really interesting of, often we get a dashboard that looks like this, but you could also potentially zoom in on this one right here. So instead of having to like go to a whole new page, you just kind of zoom in on it, do stuff in there, and then go back to that. And so you get this great fluidity of helping users move from one task to the next. And you can also do things that look kind of like inspector panels, right? So I can click on this particular dot right here, and you see all the things update over in this panel as well. And you can, potentially hide that panel if you didn't want it. So creating things that different affordances you would normally see in like a built app, right? You can start to do these sorts of things.
So just by creating that same page, and making a subpage within that where it's open and one where it's closed, linking it together, you've got a pretty rich interaction with no code.
Yep, no code.
Awesome. All right, so thank you, JD, for the little demo there. You want to learn more about Einstein Analytics, you want to play with some of this yourself, definitely invite you all to go out to Trailhead. You can get a dev.org. You can play with this for free, even if you're not an Einstein Analytics customer. Great Trailheads. We lost our deck here a little bit. But the other thing I wanted to mention was, oh, there we go. So there's Trailhead. We have a Einstein Analytics Learning Adventure app, which is on the App Exchange. You can download that into your dev.org as well and play with that. And it's got examples, it's got code examples for some of the more complex things like bindings that require a little bit of code. We really want most of the interactions to be done just with the clicks, not code. But for the things that do, we now have this learning app to show you some of the more advanced, as well as to help you choose the right charts. And then finally, we just wanted to say thank you again. But also, we have this book. And first two people to ask questions will give a book. This book has examples of some of our designs, as well as some of the slides around best practices today. So if you want to come up to a mic, ask a question, we have a couple books here. And if you reach out to us on Twitter, if these two books are gone, we might be able to find you one as well. So the first two, I saw hands come up to a mic, and feel free to ask. There's a mic right here at the center. Do you want to deliver the
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Yep. And thank you all again. First question.
So we have the analytics cloud, thank you. But how do you surface the analytics reports to a non-analytics user through, like, say, Sales Cloud?
Through Sales Cloud. So, you still have to have the license for them to see it, but you can embed any of the Einstein Analytics dashboard pages. You can either embed them partially or completely through the Lightning App Builder in the Lightning experience, or even in the classic UI as well. So they can be completely embedded with just a few lines. Directly in the Lightning App Builder, you can reach out to me, and I'll give you more specific answers there. Great, thank you for the question. Next question.
This is about, like, in your demo, you have given example, like different layouts. So how this one data set only used for all the layouts, or are you trying to use different layouts? Sorry, different data sets.
Data sets. So you can have a dashboard that hits multiple data sets. You can also combine data into single data sets if that's better. But it can query across multiple.
Okay, so just curious. Okay.
Yeah, and that's really one of the big. It's a great point, which is really one of the best reasons to use Einstein Analytics, is that you can bring data not just from in Salesforce, but across Salesforce, across objects, and create these really rich applications that are from multiple data sources, but then make them actionable back into Salesforce, the system of record.
Thank
Okay,
you.
great, thank you. Any other questions before we go? No? One more? Feel free to come up to a mic if you have a question. We've got about 2 minutes.
More of a comment.
Yeah.
I think it's worth also sharing that when people start to create dashboards,
Yes.
if you use Create Dashboard, you have all those templates that you showed right there for
Exactly.
people to use. So
Yes, thank
maybe
you.
mention
Yes.
that for everyone.
Yes, appreciate that. Yes, you can go, when you create new, you can choose from those templates for sales and service as a great starting point. With a lot of the patterns broken. Time for one more.
Hi. Is there a way to do period-over-period reporting in Wave Analytics, so snapshots of this is how it was at this point in time versus today?
Yes, as long as you feed that historical data into the data set, then we can visualize that into the dashboard to show
Thank you.
changes over time. We got one time for maybe
Yeah,
one
okay.
more? Yeah, that was a quick one.
Hi, is there a way we can use custom fields, so like revenue you were showing on the
Yes.
dashboard? Our company doesn't look at revenue, we want to do GP. So when we clone the sales app to basically remove that field, will it affect all the other dashboards that are on the same sales app, basically looking at revenue?
I think it would depend on, so are you deleting that field out of Salesforce? Or just,
No, the field is still there
Yep.
Yeah.
in Salesforce, but when I'm cloning the app to make the new app just based on GP, what I was told is that if you remove the field from this new app, it will also affect the existing apps that are in there.
Are you creating a second instance of the wizard? Or using the wizard?
I am using the wizard app.
If you create a second app, a second wizard, then it will be a separate data flow, separate data set.
yes.
Okay, there's, yeah,
Clone the dashboard, then yeah,
I'm not cloning it. So that's for,
separate data
right.
flow, separate data set that it won't affect your original copy.
so it should be fine. Then.
Yeah,
Thank
it should
you.
be
Thank you.
fine.
Yeah, because then you've got a second data set.
Cool.
Yep,
Yep.
great, thank you. Appreciate it.
I have another question. question about the packages with the analytics.
Yes.
So if there is a data flow and data set and an app is created, but I don't want to use that in the package, is there a way to delete that? I don't see it in packaging, though, the analytics. So just curious.
Not sure if I follow the question. Did you catch
You
that
want to
one?
delete the data, you mean?
I want to delete the app from the package, which I packaged it, and I want, yeah,
Right now, the guidance on managed packages is that you cannot delete any of the assets.
I see that.
They're clarifying whether that's the case or not.
Yeah,
But right now, no. You're supposed to be using the analytics app templates to package anything.
yeah.
Got it. Yeah, thank you again.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you to our
Yeah, thank you. Sure.
Yes. Yes, yes. The deck will be
It used to be
shared.
called Wave.
Again, and you can also reach out to us on Twitter or in the success community and anything you need. We can